Welcome to This Explainer. You know, when we pull up the news today, we're faced with a planet that is literally and figuratively on fire. But it really makes you wonder, are we just looking at the top of the forest and totally missing what is actually happening at ground level? I mean, it's kind of like trying to exterminate weeds in your yard by just snapping off the plant above ground and completely ignoring the root below ground. It doesn't work, right? So today, we're going to dig into the data, the journalism, and the theological frameworks presented in our sources to truly understand the roots of our burning world. So, let's dive right into this urgent question by first surveying the terrifying scale of the crises currently sweeping across our globe. We have to ask, are these events just crazy random strings of bad luck, or are they the direct results of human choices and actions? To figure that out, we really need to wrap our heads around what we're facing on the surface before we can dig down to that root. 5.25 million. That is a staggering number. That's the amount of acres lost to wildfires in the U.S. just by August of 2026. To put that into perspective for you, it's 138% of the 10-year average. According to the reports, this pushed the nation to a level 5 maximum resource commitment. The situation became so incredibly dire that over 27,000 personnel were deployed. They literally had to fly in teams all the way from Australia and New Zealand just to help battle the flames.
And this horrific scale isn't isolated, it's mirrored over in Europe. Extreme heat and prolonged drought have fueled massive fires across France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. We are talking about flames exceeding 100 meters in height. That is a 30-story tall wall of fire. Firefighters are dealing with heat so intense that when French pilots drop thousands of gallons of water from the sky, the water literally evaporates before it even hits the ground. It is an absolutely unstoppable force.
And because of this unprecedented heat, we are seeing the rise of monstrous, self-perpetuating weather systems known as pyrocumulonimbus clouds. Think of them as literal fire-generated thunderstorms that can reach 45,000 feet into the air. They rotate just like hurricanes, they produce black hail, and they shoot lightning that can start brand new fires 30 to 40 miles away. In California, one of these systems generated an actual E3 tornado with 165-mile-per-hour winds. It is a stark, terrifying reminder of nature's end-times class energy.
The absolutely crucial point here is that this chaos is happening everywhere, simultaneously. It's not just the 130,000 hectares burned in Spain. It's massive, deadly flooding leaving 100,000 people isolated in Chile. It's devastating typhoons like Bavi, Maiso, and Noel, displacing hundreds of thousands in East Asia, and 915 structures lost to the Aspen Acres fire in Colorado. But, going back to our metaphor, the sources suggest we shouldn't just stare at the visible weed above the surface. We need to dig up the root. What is actually causing this unprecedented planetary chaos?
According to the journalistic and sociological sources we reviewed, one root cause lies firmly in socio-political failures. Experts point to decades of socioeconomic policies that have drastically reduced funding for public services. For example, right as the wildfires broke out in Madrid, firefighters had actually been on strike for 40 days protesting a severe lack of resources. Add to that what sociological sources describe as aggressive political rhetoric pushing fossil fuel expansion, like the Drill Baby Drill campaigns, and a global failure to reach an international consensus on carbon emissions. You put all that together, and you have a recipe for a rapidly warming, highly combustible planet.
But, exploring that political ground level really only tells half the story. Another distinct perspective offered by our sources looks even deeper, using a theological framework to understand global suffering. This perspective basically argues that to truly understand the planet's physical state, we absolutely have to look at humanity's spiritual state.
So, chronologically, based on a biblical perspective, Earth's history begins roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. The core argument here is that planetary history is not random at all. Rather, it's a very specific sequence of events driven by the relationship between God, humanity, and the planet itself.
According to this theological text, at the exact point of creation, thousands of years ago, the Earth was completely stable. It was this beautifully placid environment, perfectly harmonious, and completely free of the destruction and disasters we just talked about. God, the Earth, and humanity related perfectly, and the ecosystem was incredibly healthy. That is, until an insidious spiritual disease called sin was introduced.
The source material argues that this spiritual disease began with what we can call the Eden infection. Humanity was given free will, and their choice to disobey God in the Garden of Eden didn't just affect human morality. It fundamentally fractured the physical health of planet Earth as a living ecosystem. Because of humanity's failures, the Earth itself literally began to suffer and groan.
And this fracture eventually compounded and culminated in a massive global flood. Now, the text outlines a really fascinating mechanical explanation for this event. It wasn't just rain. It was driven by the fountains of the Great Deep, which are these massive subterranean and volcanic releases of water from the ocean floor, combined with the windows of heaven, which the source suggests was actually the Earth's very first rainfall. That perfect ecosystem was systematically broken.
Then, roughly a century to maybe 3 centuries after the flood, humanity repeated its failures. Over at the plain of Shinar, known mostly for the Tower of Babel, human pride and ambition tried to usurp God's design. The text explains that this resulted in God dividing a single united landmass into the 7 distinct moving continents we have today. This was an irreversible global shift for both the people and the planet. Essentially, humanity was sliding down a slippery slope without a lifeline into deeper infection by sin.
From the biblical perspective provided in the text, this violent geological division at Shinar is what birthed the chaotic tectonic plates, those giant puzzle pieces of the Earth's crust that crash into each other and cause the devastating earthquakes and tsunamis we experience today. In this view, they are the direct geological echoes of humanity's ancient, prideful rebellion.
And this exact same post-Shinar atmospheric and environmental instability is what explains violent rotating storms. Whether you call them hurricanes when they hit Florida and Texas, or typhoons when they devastate East Asia, they are functionally identical symptoms of a planet whose original, placid design has been thoroughly disrupted.
The theological source outlines that all these abnormal, disastrous planetary behaviors, the sudden flash floods, the uncontrolled megafires, the agricultural droughts, and the massive tsunamis, are not natural in the original sense. They are viewed as the ongoing, physical symptoms of a suffering planet that is violently reacting to and impacted by the insidious, sinful choices of humanity.
And even if we step back from the ancient theology for a second and just look purely at today's physical data, we can see human choices directly destroying the Earth in real time. For instance, an arsonist was recently arrested with matches and a lighter, charged with starting the massive Old Trails fire in Washington state. Or consider the terrible 2024 flood in Myanmar. It wasn't just rain, it was a ruptured water reservoir used for jade mining that sent a deadly cascade down the mountain. Human ambition and negligence are quite literally sparking the flames and breaking the dams.
We've seen the 30-story flames in the flooded cities, but as we look below the ground level, we have to ask ourselves, is the burning, chaotic world we see today purely a socio-political crisis born of modern negligence? Is it the deep, enduring consequence of humanity's oldest spiritual choices, or is it a complex intertwining of both? I'll leave you to ponder that as you read the news tomorrow. Thanks so much for learning with us.